Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. This is a great episode because it's a return guest, and as always, they're a return guest. It's probably because they were good. It'd be so weird for me to. One of these days, I'm gonna reach out to the biggest dud that I've ever had and just give him a second shot. But if we have a return guest, that it's going to be good. This isn't just a return guest. I think you are setting the record right now for Here We Are appearances. We have Michael Garfield joining us with the Future Fossils podcast. Michael and I became friends in 2016, I think. I was just going through I went through all of my past guests lately and was emailing and getting guest suggestions for the Mind Under Matter Campout Festival, etc. Gonna have a lot of science talks. Wish you could make it. You're such a responsible family man now.
It's wonderful and horrible
and different.
Yes, yes.
And I was like, oh my God, I forgot how early I had you on. I think you were in the first 6 months of the show or something like that. And so fourth time back, Michael Garfield joining us. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Shane. You and I are not at all the people that we were when we met.
Yeah,
Once upon a time.
I think that's pretty great that we're both flexible, adaptive creatures. I'm trying to think of things that I've gotten worse with. I feel like I've gone in a decent direction in terms of improving on myself in ways and adapting. But I've always been trying on new Shane outfits to see what they feel like. And I just, I don't know. I don't know if it's, I'll have a new girlfriend or something like that. That'll make an impact on my life, or I just get involved with some new project or something, and then I just absorb into that project and it changes me somewhat. So I don't know. I feel like you're the same. You play music, you make a bunch of art. I remember you're like, I'm done with painting. Never painting another thing again. I'm throwing everything away. Does anyone want this crap before I burn it all? And now you're making awesome stuff. I feel like it's even better than when you fake quit.
Well, let's be fair. Okay, there's a couple things there. One, I did, in fact, paint at concerts for 12 years all over the world. And that stopped in February 2020 before and not because of COVID.
Good timing.
Yeah. Whew, thankfully. No, that was just me recognizing that I'm a father now and I've got to. Yeah.
Right.
But that other piece of the metamorphic piece, the ship of Theseus, right? Replace every little bit. Which one is left? This is good. This is honestly why I do podcasting, because you get these dips in with people, and it's turned out to be especially important and profound when everybody got separated for a few years, because there was this festival circuit that I had been on, and you miss everyone all the time, but you're also moving in sync with a whole bunch of lunatics, and you're all hanging out together, following the buffalo of, psychedelic lenticular prints and bass music or whatever the hell. And then, 2018, I realized I'm going to have a kid, and I start as a science communicator at the Santa Fe Institute, and now I'm here in Santa Fe. And to your point, yeah, I've sort of absorbed that. It's funny because now I have to wear these blue blocking glasses to be Mr. Smart Guy affect, but it's like, it's not that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, when we first met, you didn't have Future Fossils, did you? You started it shortly after.
No. We were, let's see, Future Fossils was launched in May of 2016. At Moog Fest. And we recorded the first episode, Evan Snyder, Skytree, and I recorded the first episode in January. But at any rate, this is a trying time for people. And I'd like to just honor that with some respect. I mean, your show is superb, and the people that you bring onto this show are great. And I think that your listeners are expecting me to say something intelligent and not just kibitz with you here.
You'll get there. I mean, we're catching up. We're 6 minutes in. Michael, once you get going, I'm not going to be able to stop you from saying a bunch of words I don't know while I frantically try to Google them to try to keep up. I'm not in a rush. Do I seem like a rushing around type of guy in your knowing? Like, I'm a pretty patient person. My listeners are used to my vibe. So besides Future Fossils, what else are you doing? Because I know there's been a few different changes with the other outlets that and with the Santa Fe Institute and everything are you still doing the same stuff the last time we talked?
In fact, the host of Complexity podcast now, which continues, it was recently again in the top 10 for Apple's life sciences in the US shows.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's not science. It's not like, it's a subcategory, but it's it's a fantastic show. It's really wonderful. It brings me into conversation with extraordinary people. The latest episode we had was with Sarah Walker of Arizona State University, who is working on a way to rethink the physics of life. And she and her collaborators, including Lee Cronin at the University of Glasgow, have come up with this assembly theory so that they think they can use mass spectrometry to detect the signature of either the compounds of, or compounds like the technological, not necessarily biological, but technological signatures of alien life out there, because there's a vanishingly small possibility once you get beyond like a certain number of steps in a sequence that this thing could have happened just rolling around on a windy, lifeless world. Like certain molecules, like you're not going to, you find an iPhone on Mars and you're going to be like, So there, but it's not like you're going to detect an iPhone with a mass spec, but you can find weird, puzzling things out there in space, and that theory has implications that get into all kinds of. I mean, she's wonderful. She was a student of Paul Davies, who has written a number of books about how the entire universe might be a single sentient being. So yeah, I like my job overall. I get to do the live tweeting for the Santa Fe Institute's complex systems seminars and colloquia and stuff. So it's good.
So what's the difference between Future Fossils and the Complexity podcast, would you say?
Drugs.
Drugs. That's about it. Future Fossils just has more drugs on it.
Well, I mean, seriously, the president of the Santa Fe Institute told me on the day that he appointed me the host of this podcast I had proposed in my job interview that he's like, I want the sober version of you. Okay. And that's fair. That's fair because they are a very prestigious, reputable organization. And yet, I mean, the science there does the work itself. You know, the science there is psychedelic. It's insane. Right. It's not about psychedelics, but it is transformative to the way that I think and to the way that anyone whom our team of science communicators can help sort of transpose these insights. You know, I'm not a math guy. And so in a weird way, I am forever kind of in between, or, you know, I'm not inside some of these conversations. I'm just like outside doing the Rosetta Stone thing for everyone else. Right. And so the impact that's had on me has been utterly transformative. And it's, you know, I think when I was hanging out with you in 2017, we were talking about the internet as a psychedelic, like the internet functioning as a psychedelic for everyone all at once, but at the scale of the planet. And so it's going to take much, much, much longer to come on to the trip. Right. And so the question is, you know, how long before the anxious first 45 minutes or so of this mushroom trip that is the World Wide Web scaled up, you know, from the individual human brain to the bio/technosphere, you know, what is that going to, I mean, are we going to be like, are we finally going to hit our stride sometime in the 22nd century? But you know, now as a parent, I'm just like, you know, squirming.
I mean, it's a tough one because you have a lot of people that are always going to be kind of indifferent to any new technology. I am in a lot of ways, depending on the domain. And especially in terms of learning how it works or whatever, I'll be like, yeah, give me like the best thing. Just overcharge me for whatever you convincingly tell me is the best thing to like make my microphone work or whatever. Give me that. Okay, my iPhone's waterproof. That sounds like a terrific feature. I stand up paddleboard a bunch. I couldn't tell you how an iPhone works. I have no idea. And then, but I'll take to them if it offers to maybe make my life convenient, or something. Yeah, it does that. It does other things you don't want it to, but it definitely does that. But I wonder how much there's going to be, like my dad still has a flip phone. There's going to be some people older than us that are never going to take it on. But like my mom she for the last year or two, she just can't stop talking about the YouTubes. I saw this on the YouTubes. She's learning all these things on the YouTubes and she just can't get enough of this stuff. And they're so resistant to get them to, if I'm visiting and I try to like teach them how to like use Netflix or something so they don't have to watch commercials and they can watch their show that they like anytime they want to. They'll like do it if I'm there, and then the moment I leave, they'll forget. They won't ask, and so there's that, and that's going to be kind of going away, you know, as people are, as every young person and your child as a tablet and everything else. But then there's going to be the kind of Luddites that are like, this is ruining everything, and we need to go back to the basics and make an intentional effort to get rid of the things that they might actually, they understand phones, they get phones, they're familiar with them, but they're intentionally trying to rid themselves. So the people like that are just not interested, indifferent to it, that's just going away. So it's going to be, I don't know. I wonder how the population will change in like 10 years or so, and what people, we were talking before we started recording about how much I like yurts and would maybe like to live in a yurt or have a yurt to live in sometimes or something like that. And there's the pandemic did that too. There was this natural appeal to like, you know what? If I can work remotely, I'm going to go live in a cabin in the woods. And
oh yeah. Well, I mean, so I think the last time I was on your show, we were talking about the like cognitive biases and the way that people cannot really think at the scale of the events that are unfolding now for everyone. No. And so, you know, that's just one tiny, like that's one corner of this like rhombic icosahedron of thoughts on the fact that there is this acceleration going on of recombinant interactions between agents in a multi-layer, multi-scale. The way I'm talking about this is distinctly, complex systems kind of stuff. This is the stuff that I've internalized in the last 3.5 years working here. But it's that everything is holding this tension. So let me back up a little bit. Complex system science seems to be more about understanding the upper and lower bounds or the thresholds. It's not about giving you like a clean, simple, easy answer. It's about, in the world of like traditional sort of atomic physics, you've got disorganized simplicity, or organized simplicity, and then you on the other end you've got disorganized complexity, and then there's this organized complexity that exists in the human domain, and pretty much everything that we care about as people on this sphere, I care about the stars and like looking up into space and so on. But everything happening on this world, everything that influences us, is in this ongoing, ever evolving thing where different components are learning from each other, interacting, trying to keep up with what's going on, influencing, every time you learn something about the way that you think the world is, and it changes your behavior, and then you interact with everybody else, and then you've created a different world. And so there's, in my opinion, and I think that, the science bears this out, that we're in a weird spot right now where the amount of all of this going on has gotten to the point where the gap between our models of the world as it is and what's actually happening seem to be getting kind of wider and wider.
You think so?
I mean,
that's interesting. I mean, it depends on the context a lot.
Okay, right. Yeah. So but I say this, in reference to, talking about your camp out and everything, and wanting to get back to the roots or whatever, in that, there are these conveniences, these economies of scale, efficiencies that happen courtesy of being in participating in networks.
Yeah.
But concrete example, like Facebook, connecting everybody to everybody. But then it turns out that horrible things happen when you do that, or connecting every physical location, every culture to every other culture. And so the boundaries on the one end, on the lower bound is like, how little can we be connected to each other and still communicate, still interact, still benefit from one another. On the upper bound, it's how much can we communicate without it completely destroying any kind of ecological boundaries, like the spread of zoonotic plagues, for instance. The rampant, unregulated deployment of technological innovation that's happening fast. Like, you get these things where misinformation spreads faster than debunking. That I know that's a popular topic for you, and so I think we're at we're kind of Wile E. Coyote over the cliff now, realizing that we've overshot it, and the question is how far. I don't buy into the binary of like accelerationist, transhumanist, Ray Kurzweil, adolescent, transcendent fantasy, or collapse into we're all going back to the first scene of 2001. Like it's going to be a patchwork of what science fiction author and science nonfiction author Annalee Newitt's called in their book Scatter, Adapt, and Remember. That when the tower gets too big, Tower of Babel falls over. There's a burst of diversification, new strategies, creativity. It looks very chaotic for a while. Nobody's got a good story. Jamie Stantoni, and I might have mentioned him actually on the last episode I did with you, where Jamie Stantonian has this great essay called Early Modern, Apocalyptic Cults. And he's talking about the printing press and pamphleteering and how basically social media now is an octave up the same phenomenon that was happening that precipitated the 30 Years' War in Europe, where everybody lost the plot. Like there was too much information for people to process, manage, categorize, and reality appeared to be falling apart. And so people started forming these conclaves, and so I think we're seeing something like that happening. The Roe v. Wade thing is an interesting example of this, where it's like, Kurt Vonnegut said, any country larger than Denmark is a damned fool's mistake in the novel Bluebeard. And so like, it looks like the United States is running this experiment now of just how much can we really continue pretending that we're capable of regulating and responding to the pace of change at the scale of a continent or a global superpower. How are these things relating? And so you're going to see lots of things breaking down in different ways, but a lot of that is good, right? Because it'll be like, oh, I'm going to start growing food in my own yard again. And it turns out that putting my hands in the dirt, and huffing some petrichor is actually good for your gut biome and your brain and all this stuff. So I don't know. End rant.
Well, I like the rant. What's odd is that there is, pre-agriculture and kind of hunter-gatherer times, I'm sure one group's beliefs and another group's beliefs just went off in all sorts of wild ways. But I'm also sure that there would have been some kind of like basic underlining sort of behaviors that you would predict, that there would be some sort of higher power that one was one might think this one thing, one might think another, or whatever. But there just wasn't that much available knowledge to know about objective reality back then, outside of trying to assess where good hunting grounds were and figuring out seasonal change and that sort of thing. But now I feel like people can get so much information, and it's even the disinformation is the stuff that drives me insane, is far closer to reality than what some hunter gatherer would have believed, or information that they would have had access to. And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a certain I think that we still, it's more about what we care about, and I think that humans still care about the same sort of things. We're such social animals that most people just aren't going to care about learning physics, or are going to have some sort of the incredulousness I have toward watching baseball or something, which I'll do just as a pleasantry to like amuse. I'll be like, okay, the Brewers just scored, terrific, to as social lubricant. That's sort of the same like look that I see in other people's eyes when I try to talk about biology or something like that, And so there is information available, and it's just some of it's about caring, and then some of it's about being overwhelmed by just how much there is, and just how much, like my mom just is she's like 3 weeks past COVID. She didn't have that much it wasn't that bad for her acutely, but it's been lingering for a few weeks, and she's like, well, I'm going to the chiropractor every week, and like he's working and giving me things, and I'm like, I don't want to say, well, you just maybe don't go and see that guy who's on top of everything else that you're dealing with is taking money from you for a thing that, and I'm like, maybe a back adjustment makes someone feel like this and that's happening, and what am I going to do? Argue with this person? And so I guess, I don't know. I'm not sure that everything is necessarily too complex for all of us to understand, even though I get it. Like there's so many things that I'm completely indifferent to, that I should learn. Chemistry being one, for example. I won't learn it. I will not learn chemistry, and I should. It's a huge gap in my knowledge. But
you'll learn it the hard way.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, through drugs. So I don't know. I have a hard time. I have a hard time telling if it's just that people are just a little new to some of this stuff. I think if you're just logging on to Facebook and seeing memes and stuff, and that might have misinformation, it's really compelling for a little while. And then I think, people start getting used to the game. I know there's going to be like new games all of the time, but I think people will start seeing through some of that eventually. And maybe there'll be like better and better kind of internet heuristics that people are adapting and evolving.
Let me clarify.
Sure.
So in 2017, I wrote this science fiction novelette called An Oral History of the End of Reality, which was prompted by Adobe announcing that they had designed software that could listen to a 20-second sample of someone's voice and then clone the voice. And then you could type text and get whatever you want. And of course, this, it's been years and the technology has advanced considerably since then. And so every day that goes by, it seems to me as though this prophetic rant that I penned out in 2017 is bearing more and more true. The problem is one of in that story, and I think in fact, the arms race between forgery and counterfeiting. I mean, between forgery and counterfeit detection, forensics. And I mean, that's perhaps oversimplifying it because that's suggesting that that's suggesting a sort of consensus bedrock rather than a groundlessness, which I think is perhaps the more accurate thing. But at any rate, each of us as a body represent or instantiate memory about an environment that was relatively stable for a very, very, very long time. And so much of your show is about this, is about, reconciling the environment in which the evolutionary human baseline was adapted. And then this thing that's been going on for, it depends on where you want to draw the line, but you might say it started when we actually became human and formed societies, and that the society became an emergent agent or individual that was exerting downward causal pressure on all of us, because the way that we, Jessica Flack at the Santa Fe Institute has a paper, has done a ton of work on this actually in other primate societies, where you have to not only size up your opponent in a prospective fight, you have to be able to understand whether other people in the troop of macaques or whatever are going to pile on you or on them if they are watching the fight. You have to know you have to be able to understand your own sort of like stock value and theirs. And that's the economics that's constantly changing. That's the model. You are constantly running a lossy, biased, and provisional assessment of the environment that is being updated and is updating your behavior and is changing everyone else's updates in the same way. And so there's talk about like gene culture interaction, this kind of thing. This is what got me into thinking about complex systems when I was an undergrad, reading about the way that genes and culture interact in the maintenance of songbird vocal learning. But at any rate, there are multiple different timescales. There's the evolutionary timescale. There's the developmental timescale of an organism, and how it actually becomes a body. And then there's the learning timescale. And if the environment is changing faster than whatever you are can encode, can adapt, then you just fly right off the back of the treadmill. And that's what I'm talking about is really that we may get to, and the takeaway of that story, a lot of people reading An Oral History of the End of Reality found it very unsettling, found it very dark and scary to think that we were not going to be able to have a handle on what is true anymore. But for me, it was a beating down of the fallacious insistence that we can know something with total certitude. And an invitation into and an injunction to enter a much more rigorously and appropriately scientific humility, which is that we can and must say, we must act in this world. We must act on assumptions. We have to do something, but we have to accept that we must update our beliefs about this thing, and that we're gonna have to change our opinions. And so this is the the confidence interval. This is the Stuart Firestein actually gave a talk at SFI recently about this, about the uncertainty as the philosophical basis for optimism, because things can be otherwise. Firestein's an interesting guy. He studies olfaction. He's the dean of biology at Columbia University in New York. But he spent 15 years on in the theater, on stage in New York before he became a scientist. And so, he's very comfortable with getting stuck in a weird spot, wrote books on failure and on ignorance, and cherishes these things. And I think that's what's going to change. I mean, this stuff makes us uncomfortable, but to the degree that we are able to come out of it intact, what will come out will be, I think, a human being or a humankind that is far, far more comfortable with not knowing what the hell is going on.
I think that it has to be that way, and I think that it's a mark of improvement in a society. Actually, I think that because also there are a lot of things that I don't need to know how my public sewer system works. I just need to know that it's working and someone knows how it works, and that there's humans are able to specialize in all sorts of ways and keep on adding on to things. But I think that in terms of, I often find myself thinking about kind of embodied cognition and the way in which these environmental cues can change our perception about like existential things, or our perception of outgroups, or our willingness to travel, or whatever. If we're primed to smell a rotten egg, or think about diseases or something like that, or are financially even restricted in some way and stressed, and we become more closed, you're going to ambiguity and lack of control are going to be more and more of a threat. But in country after country that has increased its sanitation, that's increased that's advanced its drinking water, things like that, those countries become just more open and more, but I guess the easy way to define things is liberal, but that's sometimes at the end of the day just shorthand for more of a tolerance for ambiguity. And there's something about that. So then once there's more of a tolerance for ambiguity, then there's going to be like more weirdness and strangeness, and people are going to be doing more weird festivals and dressing in certain ways that you aren't used to. And I think at some certain point, some of those people are just going to have to accept, like, I don't think they're going to, but I think that there's just going to be like, well, if you want a working, clean, safe society, you have to accept that the strength that comes from that allows for the vulnerability of creativity and people being weird. Not that creativity doesn't also come out of horrible times, but do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Where it's just, our default our default hunter gatherer, like watch out for that tribe over the hill, is just there are few things more antiquated than that in a modern society, and that's good news. But you still see it being expressed.
Are we in a modern society though?
I mean, we're in a more modern-ish society by the context of whatever 400 years ago or so. I mean,
modernity. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Weird Studies podcast. My friends Jeff Martell and Phil Ford host this show that is an on-running virtuosic critique of the conceits of modernity. You know, and was it Latour who said, oh God, who was it? They said, we've never actually been modern. You know, this is an idea because, you know, the modernism as a project of control, as a 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕚𝕒𝕝 I'll link you to this essay I wrote about surveillance capitalism and the effects of living in an algorithmic society on psychology and on the self, and how it requires us to become more and more sort of metamorphic in order to either be seen or to become legible or to become illegible. You know, we must now adapt to, again, this system in which we are all embedded that knows us and preys upon us. And many people, including Timothy Snyder, in his essay about what, you know, Turing and the Turing's caution, you know, what Turing didn't understand about the threats of the world of the computer. We now live in a world in which we have participated in the, if not the outright recreation of, at least the explicit reminding of the fact that that the city was always wild. You know, that we built a wall. You know, the ancient Greeks were like, oh yeah, there's like dryads and maenads and stuff out there. It's unsafe beyond the city walls. This is the human space. And then we tried to wrap that thing around the planet. And in so doing, we got into a Jurassic Park kind of scenario where we realized that every effort we make at total knowledge and control ends up generating externalities and blind spots that undermine the project. And so 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕚𝕒𝕝's liquid modernity, he talks about modernity being really a dual-natured thing that is at odds with itself. On one hand, it's about agency, self-authorship, you know, improvement. Those things are, I mean, actually improvement and like self-transformation are at odds with the dual virtue of control and total knowledge. And so, you know, we find ourselves now back in this situation where, to the extent that you can scale up and look at civilizations, institutions, organizations, religions, etc., as entities in their own right, which I think it's been fairly well established that these things are, whether or not they're like, you know, self-aware is kind of beside the point. Like a slime mold is still an intelligent creature of some kind. We live inside the body of these very, very large, hard to recognize and impactful agencies that shape our lives. And so we're not at the top of the food chain, and we haven't been for as long as we've been living in community with one another. And we're just starting to become aware of that. And it's very, very unsettling, but it's actually, for some perhaps something of a relief, because we're no longer capable of lying to ourselves about our priority or exceptionalism, about our place on the top of this imagined ontology.
Oh, there's still some people telling themselves some.
Oh, no. Don't get me wrong. Doug Rushkoff has written extensively about the billionaire attempt to, transcend death and escape the planet. And, this is very much going on, but it's a position of privilege to lie to yourself about this. And eventually living in a gated neighborhood doesn't solve crime. It just actually quantitatively, a society obsessed with the private security actually produces more crime. So what you're really only doing is you're just kicking the ball down the street, but it's snowballing and it's going to be bigger when it gets back to you. So I actually feel a certain amount of like sympathy and pity for people like Bezos and Musk that are like privileged enough to think that they don't have to address this kind of thing.
Well, it's happened through history of people having elaborate tombs made with all of throw my servants in with me when I die, because my favorite servants, put them in there too so they can go with me until the afterlife. And I think that there's a part of remembering the beginning of the pandemic. It was like the only people flying around were rich people flying around in private jets, and it was like they were on vacation. Just would not be told that there was some communal need or desire or something that would restrict people that were used to having unrestricted lifestyles, and it drove people like Musk kind of a little loopy, in my opinion. But what about I often wonder with kind of, so obviously technology's advancing at an outrageous speed when you're thinking about something like the internet. If you think about something like the street that you live on, you think, well, really? We don't have better roads by now. We don't we don't have like solar power sidewalks or something that's like, why isn't this moving along fast enough? And that seems like, if I look back 40 years by any of those standards, it's like, well, my hometown is just more populated, and maybe they have made some advances in like the way in which we regulate how buildings are made, and tools have gotten better, and it doesn't take as long to build a roof and things like that. There's these small changes, but those aren't feeling like, whoa, this is out of control. You go on the internet and you're like, my God, this is moving so fast. But the thing about this is what I'd like you to, I would like some of your thoughts on. At the rate in which, let's just keep it really simple. At the rate in which computers, your phone, the internet is advancing, going on, checking social media, cool new filter all of the time. Wow, I can look like Freddie Mercury or whatever instantly. How does it do that? Wow. But at the same time that it's doing that, they're also innovating. They're innovating user-friendly. It's also adapting itself to us anyway. I don't know how this fucking computer works. All that I know is I'm looking at you right now. I'm talking to you. I guess it's like shooting around in satellites or something like that. Stuff that I haven't really looked into don't need to know. And from the time I started doing remote podcasts to 2 years later, I only use better programs, more intuitive programs that are more reliable. I seemingly understand social media a little quicker than I did before, because I think some of the bugs have been worked out. And so what's your take on that, with the kind of fears of a singularity and computers getting so smart, but at the same time, aren't they? Isn't the way in which we are figuring out how to blend internet advances into our intuitions also advancing?
Yes, but I mean, again, like, I think everything you just said really just strengthens the point that in a world of nested systems within systems interacting with systems within systems, not everything is updating at the same speed. And again, to tip my hat to Doug Rushkoff, whose book Present Shock largely inspired Future Fossils podcast, the pace at which certain of these systems, the digital world, are capable of scaling gives us this illusion that, or, like, the economy grows and grows and grows. And so economists tend to think that they're like the only people in the world that think the economy can grow forever. That it can just keep growing, and not only keep growing, that it can grow faster and faster and faster, and that people are going to continue to be able to make sense of it and participate in it. And
there's not enough people. We need more of them.
Right. I mean,
we're having a people shortage.
Well, I mean, we may actually be having a people shortage here soon. I just spoke with Parag Khanna.
I go back and forth with that stuff. I don't mean to derail you.
No. But I mean, that's to the point, which is that actually the demands of living in this very, very fast-paced environment, the costs of living in this environment, not just attentionally, but in terms of brick and mortar stuff, rent. Fewer and fewer young people in the developed world, this world of the tolerance of ambiguity and free cultural expression and so on, are capable of affording to have children. I mean, I also think about this in terms of, I used to live in Austin, Texas, and as the real estate goes up and up and up and up, the thing that made the town valuable, which was its culture of musical performance, becomes impossible because venues can no longer sell enough beer to keep the doors open. And if you're optimizing for real estate speculators, then every parcel of land in downtown Austin would be better off as condos. And so at some point, you've in much the same way that, we optimized for efficiency with just-in-time supply networks, you get to a point where you have no slack left in the system at all. And things break. There are perks to living in this thing, but actually, as I sit here enjoying this bubble tea, I think about diaper shortages and like $5, $6, $7 gas, and it's just, if people are being hoovered up into these megalopolises for economic opportunity, but then the research on the cities as networks shows that the majority of the per capita benefits of cities is actually only enjoyed by the top decile economically, and that for everyone else it's harder. But what you've done is you have done something akin to big agriculture decimating biodiversity, except you've done it with human culture. And so we're on very, very thin topsoil right now in a number of different ways as a civilization. And we are, humans are genetically very, very homogeneous. I mean, any human is more genetically alike any other human than chimps are alike the chimps on the other side of the river.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you get into, this is why, plagues tear through us the way that they can and do. And so, yeah, it's just a question of us finding our, it's not that, I mean, certain things will continue to, I think there is an overall trend toward the evolutionary process finding, faster, smarter, slicker, more efficient stuff. But there's always this countervailing pressure of those forces undermining themselves. And I think that I basically just been on a rant about this for half an hour, that we will, that, when historian William Irwin Thompson, who rage quit MIT in the 1970s to form an interdisciplinary think tank about the emergence of planetary culture, the Lindisfarne Association. I will send you the Lindisfarne tapes, which are all of the talks that they were doing in the 70s at the E.F. Schumacher Center for New Economics. It's an extraordinary series of conversations that I binged while on festival tour in 2013 all over the country. And even in 1973, 74, Bill Thompson was talking about the end of technocratic globalism and the emergence of a post-civilizational, highly technological planetary village. Not the global village, not a flat world, but a very, very heterogeneous patchwork world that much more closely resembles the world that we had, only now it's also hyper connected to itself in a bunch of interesting new ways, and it's augmented in a lot of new interesting ways. And I think I don't know if you've watched Star Trek, but Star Trek Picard had a little bit of this going on, where one of the characters is basically like living in a camper in the desert, but she's got like a food fabricator and all of this stuff. And I think that's it's what we're seeing is it's over. All of the categories are getting remixed, challenged, overturned. And so in overturning nature and culture, as well as many other things, we are going to find, like, I don't know. Do you ever take the train?
I used to. The Amtrak, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't travel anymore, but I used to anytime I could. And in the US, it's really rough because it's if you want to get to A to B, you often have to take a wild detour through Z to L to over here, and it can add days onto a trip.
Yeah.
But I love it. When I've been in Europe, I've loved taking them. And sometimes, by the way, I'm a shout out to Amtrak if you can find a train that actually makes sense, because at least in my experience of it, I loved it. And sometimes there's one of the cars, they'll have like guided tours and stuff like that. They'll do like weird shit like that. It's fun. It's a little cheaper. There's free internet. The seats are more comfortable than a plane. I hate flying so much. So uncomfortable. Anyway, your point was?
Point being that while this is not the case in Australia, I took the train from Melbourne to Sydney in Australia. That was awesome.
How long was that? 12 hours?
12 hours, yeah. It was
nailed it.
Yeah, it was great. Coming in from the West into Sydney through all of that lush tropical stuff. But in the United States,
amazing.
everywhere I take the train in the US, maybe a full half of the people on the train are Mennonites. And
really,
yes, and this is the point: is that they're speaking this Germanic language that is kind of, sort of German, kind of Dutch, kind of English. It's not, and they're inhabiting the same space that we are. It's 2022. They're living in the same year, but the way that they've managed to partition themselves from the network is of note. And so, like, it's interesting because, like, rail has to be laid through a landscape in a particular way. And so when the interstate system was set up in the United States, a lot of the train towns were basically siphoned out. Like they dried up because it was different land. Cars could get into different spots and different opportunities. And yet those trains, the rail that still exists in that network are, so there, it's just like I guess what I'm saying is that there's something very ancient future about all of this, that we're still going to be milking cows in 200 years, and we think all the action is happening over here, but, like, for instance, the United States now is not North versus the South; it's urban versus rural, right? And so every, the transformation that we're all navigating is one in which all of us are patchy,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's one directional too. Is a lot of times it'll either be a city or a rural person that's never spent any time in either of the other one. But if anything, usually rural people will integrate into the city and understand some of the needs that are there, and then the people that left behind that just don't go into the big city at all don't really totally understand what it's like, but still are, a part of the agreed upon laws and systems that are imposed on, say, big city life. And same with city people going and imposing things on rural people with, say, agricultural restrictions or something like that, where we're like, hey, we need to stop all this pollution or global warming or whatever, and whatever, farmers just figure it out. And then farmers that are putting fertilizer into streams, like not knowing it in Wisconsin or something like that, in Mississippi, don't understand how that's impacting fishing in the Gulf Coast, and then are expected to pay $70,000 or something to put in some drainage system, or that they don't ever have to see the impact of. It is patchy, and it's a mess. I want to do here's a little kind of side note thing to close on, just to, because I want to plug your shows and everything. How did you go from a paleontologist, being interested in paleontology, wearing a dinosaur shirt to this day? How did you go from that to getting so interested in the future and these really large abstract ideas and technology and everything else, and then what podcasts would you recommend for a given, if you had to take your podcast and then choose a specific demographic? If there's two different demographics, describe those as well. Go.
Okay, so my torrid tale is that I encountered a paper on the evolution of syntactic communication my senior year of my undergraduate. And that paper by Martin Nowak, led by Martin Nowak, who I think he was at Princeton at the time, was about how if you're apes living in society and you are communicating using single utterances, then you get to a point where you can't remember as many words as you need to actually navigate the society. There's too many things to remember. There's too much stuff. And they call it the error catastrophe. So you start misassigning labels. And so it becomes easier to use a recombinant, like a multiplier rather than a purely additive approach. And this shows up all the time. This is the evolution of sex. Sex appears when, it's like an additive strategy no longer works. So we're gonna exchange things. And so that's what lifted me out of paleontology, basically, was thinking about the evolution of life and mind in terms of the way that ecosystems and the beings in them are interacting with one another and understanding one another. And as far as the podcast part, I would hasten to, I think it was episode 184 of Future Fossils with Henry G., the senior editor of Nature.
Had him on. He's one of my favorite guests last year.
Oh, God, he's wonderful. Henry G.
He is an incredible communicator. I can't believe he doesn't do more speaking and things for a living.
Yeah, no, he's superb. He wrote this book about a brief history of life on Earth and lays it out as the ongoing exploration of this manifold of possibility. I mean, you've got to invent photosynthesis. You've got to invent the ability to digest lignin. You've got to invent flight. And so we move into more and more dimensional spaces over the course of the history of things. And it's very juicy. I don't know.
Okay. Well, then the second part of the question, what is you're going to encourage a person to either listen to Future Fossils or the Complexity podcast. Why should a person give one of those? Or if you want to mention a couple of your favorite episodes from each one, you want to do that? Is that a better way of going about it?
Sure.
How do you want to plug yourself?
Oh man.
I mean, I have I have two podcasts. They maybe have two more dissimilar vibes than your two podcasts have. So I'm specifically reaching two different demographics, kind of, and trying to use one to lead another one into over here. So anyway, I'll let you plug yourself.
Thanks. I would say that the Future Fossils tends to be a bit more concerned about questions of the soul.
Okay.
You know, that which cannot be captured, quantified, and understood. You know, I'm staring into the abyss, and I'm okay with that. And however, you know, the abyss is evident in the complexity of all of these formal, rigorous approaches and the worlds they disclose as well. So, I mean, favorite episodes? I mean, if thinking about this stuff really strokes you, I would say for Complexity Podcast, go to episode 37 with Lawrence Gonzalez, who wrote a book on survival, what it means to be like what determines who lives and who dies in a scary situation. But then he followed it up with a book about trauma, surviving survival, about how you get on with the rest of your life. And that's the trauma is, you know, things have changed faster than you can adapt to them. And 3 things come out of that in his study. He says, creativity, you know, writing, that's one. Travel and service. And so if you think about like religion, you know, you get like the archaeological origins of religion as an adaptation to the trauma of the hardship of the conditions of early hominin existence. The pilgrimage is about that process of self-transformation, you know, and service and so on. And so it's Lawrence Gonzalez is extremely erudite and wonderful. And I think that's a fabulous episode to focus on. And then as far as Future Fossils is concerned, I might point people toward 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟𝕠𝕪 𝕠𝕠𝕠. I think he was 172 because he's an Appalachian Clan Aboriginal Australian. But, you know, if you were to run into him in a Hy-Vee or Kroger's or whatever, you'd look like a white guy. And he works at the Indigenous Knowledge Systems. He directs the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab in Melbourne. And there they explore the ways that very, very ancient knowledge systems dating back 50, 60,000 years have managed to persist, you know, ways to mnemonically encode information in the body, you know, to map the body to the land. And I think that's all extremely important. And that's an instantiation of this kind of like thinking across scales that we're performing here. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Michael Garfield, everybody, thank you once again for being on the show. You were great as always. Wonderful to have you. Check out Future Fossils. Check out the Complexity Podcast. You're great, my friend. Can't wait to be on your show as well soon, which Ramin and I will be on Future Fossils very soon.
Indeed.
Hooray!
Yeah.